Okay, it's 7:01. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the Vote Local interview series sponsored by the Doylestown Democrats. I'm Judy Dixon, a committee person with the Doylestown Democrats. This is our sixth and final installment of the series where we ask our local officials, what exactly is it that you do? This is a starting point for a deeper dive into a conversation with our local officials to learn more about local government. This is your civics lesson for the month. So many of us know more about what's going on in the national news than we do about what's going on in our own backyard. This series hopes to change all of that. So together, a group of Democrats put this together so we can be more informed, and we hope you enjoy it. This Zoom session is being recorded. You can find it on our YouTube channel. So tonight we're going to have State Senator from the 10th District, Steve Santarsiero, and former State Representative Wendy Ullman of the 143rd District. In previous sessions, we started even more locally. We had the Doylestown Mayor and Council. We had Doylestown Township Supervisors. Then we moved out into the county with county row offices and county commissioners. And we also added Bucks County School Board directors to our interview series to learn more about their functions and how important they are for our community. So just a quick roadmap to this evening. First, I'll start with a brief overview of the State Senate, House, and Representatives. Then I'll introduce tonight's guest. Then Connor O'Hanlon will be joining us. He is the chair of the Doylestown Democrats. He's back with us again this evening, and he'll have some pre-formulated questions for us, but you can also put your questions into Q&A. And lastly, you'll learn how you can get local and get more engaged. First, a little bit about the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Both state senators and state representatives are members of the General Assembly. It is a bicameral system, meaning there are two legislative branches. The General Assembly has 253 members. So Pennsylvania has the second largest state legislature in the nation. And if you look off to the right, you can see we have 50 state Senate seats and 203 state representative seats. You can see the red represents the Republicans and the blue, the Democrats, and the Democrats are in the minority. So we have to figure out how to change all of that. You can also see the length of term. So a state senator has to run and has a term of every 4 years if they choose to run again. And a state House representative is reelected every 2 years, meaning they're constantly running for office. You can also see the salary there. So for some, it might be a step up, but for many of our legislature, it truly is a public service. So although the pay may be just kind of okay, the pensions can be very good after 5 years. It is based on the term of office. So lastly, let's talk about how the legislative districts are drawn, because there's been a lot of talk of gerrymandering. Legislative districts are drawn every 10 years following the US Census, and districts are drawn by a 5-member commission. So there's a majority of the House and the majority leader of the Senate are on this commission, along with the minority leader of the House and the minority leader of the Senate. The 5th cannot be an appointed official. They have to be agreed upon by both houses, which did not happen this term. So that 5-member commission is currently being put together. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did go ahead and just appoint someone, a professor from the University of Pittsburgh, to be that 5th non-elected official on the redistricting commission. So while we're talking about redistricting, why don't we take a look at the maps? So here is State Senate of the 10th District, that map. You can see this is Steve's district, Senator Santarsiero's. It runs all the way from Haycock Township all the way down to Falls Township. It runs along the river. You can see that the interests of the people in Haycock Township might be completely different, that rural community, than much further south in Falls Township, a much more densely populated area. So we can definitely talk a little bit about that coming up in our questions. Then we're going to look at the State House 143rd District. That's a little more compact. And it runs along the river at points, and then it doesn't. As you can see down in Doylestown, obviously the river's right now outside of Doylestown. So it's like Doylestown is kind of carved out and put into this rural community that goes from Regalsville down into Doylestown. And we can ask Wendy maybe a little bit more about that. Next slide. Okay, so what do the House and Senators do? Well, they go into legislative sessions and they go on committees. The General Assembly convenes on the first Tuesday of January every year, and then they meet regularly throughout the year. So these sessions are scheduled in advance, and the representatives can go and take a look at the schedule to see when they're supposed to be in session, because the schedules do change, although they are posted on the calendar month. The Assembly does meet in the Pennsylvania State Capitol and has to meet by Pennsylvania Constitution in Harrisburg, and can only be moved with the consent of both chambers. Now, this did change with the pandemic. We did have people going to the state capitol with masks, but they were allowing Zoom meetings due to the pandemic, and we know that there were outbreaks in the state chambers. So the state legislature operates mainly through standing committees. So most bills cannot be enacted into law unless it has been referred to and acted upon by a standing committee. Each committee is set up to consider bills relating to a particular subject. Standing committees are charged with important responsibilities of examining bills and recommending actions to the state Senate or House. Often, on days when a legislature is not in session, the committee of each house meets to consider the bills that are referred to them. For most bills, the recommendation of the committee are followed, though either house is free to accept or reject the actions of the committee. Now, most of the work of the legislature is done by the committees. The legislature as a whole relies on the committee to report only those bills deserving of the consideration of the entire House. So if a bill passes of the same points in the House and of the Senate, a conference committee is impaneled to discuss the differences and to try and come up with a bill that can be agreed to. If the conference committee is unable to reach agreement, it may be discharged, and a new conference committee can be appointed. If an agreement is never reached in a conference prior to the end of the legislative session, the bill is lost. Now, the governor, that's one way. So that's the majority of the ways that we get legislation through the state representatives. The other way is the governor may call a special session in order to pass legislation, but that doesn't happen very often. I have only records from 2017, and there are only 35 special sessions in all the history of the state of Pennsylvania. So, but a more common tactic that's being used to enact legislation is one that just happened this past primary. To avoid a governor's veto, the legislature can ask for a ballot amendment, which requires amending the state constitution. And this what was voted on in the May 2020 primary, where the emergency powers were limited by the governor by a Republican amendment to the Constitution that did pass during that voting, sad to say. So that's how bills go. And we are now going to have a polling question. No, I'm sorry, we're going to go to constituent services. My apologies. So besides legislation and besides being in committees, the State House and Senator and Representative also has constituent services. So these are samples that I've taken from both Senator Santarsiero's and the current representative website. You can see on Senator Santarsiero's website, it's very robust. Of particular interest to me was the consumer protection links on Steve's website. So you could go there if you didn't know this and you had a problem with a particular business, you could actually file a complaint through your representative, through Steve's office, which is wonderful. You can also schedule a meeting with him. You can look for grants or scholarships, or maybe you have someone that might be a good internship. These are all functions. Please, if you're having problems within your community, use your constituent services. The current representatives, she runs every 2 years, so that representative has to run for every 2 years. So hers was a little less robust, but kudos to Senator Santarsiero for such a great website for the constituents. And now we are going to go to the polling questions.
So we will see that the polling question says, have you used services of your state senator or state representative? You can hit yes or no, and we will see what the results are in a second. And then after that, we'll move over to the introductions to our guests tonight. So it looks like 57% say yes, 43% say no. So a pretty even split there.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Connor. So Senator Santarsiero and former Representative Wendy Ullman, thank you both for having us. I'm just going to do a brief introduction, if I may, so I can show all your fabulous credentials. Starting with Steve. Senator Steve Santarsiero considers public service a calling. After witnessing the September 11th attacks from the windows of his law office in Newark, New Jersey, Steve decided to seek a new career in teaching as a way to serve the community. He was hired as a social studies teacher at Bensalem High School. At about that same time, Steve became a leader in the grassroots movement to stop a big box shopping mall in Lower Makefield. That experience led Steve to run for township supervisor, and he was elected in 2003. Steve then ran and won for the state House seat in Yardley Newtown, and in 2018, Steve became a state senator. Steve serves on the Judiciary Committee as the minority chair. Steve's other committees include appropriations, consumer protections and professional licensure, environmental resources and energy, and lastly, intergovernmental questions. Intergovernmental operations. Steve is a graduate of Tufts University, where he received his BA. He received his JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and his master's in education from Holy Family. Steve, thanks for making it on the call.
Thanks, Judy, and thank you for that great overview of the state legislature. I apologize that you don't have video here, but I'm actually sitting in my car because we're in session. And although we've broken for the day, since this is the Doylestown Democrats, I can't really be in the building and participate in this at the same time. So that's why I'm sitting in my car. And you know, I don't think that the video would be all that that's helpful. So, but I do want to say a few things, and thank you for the introduction. As I said, it was a great overview of the legislative process. The one thing I'll say that while we do have the option to have a conference committee to reconcile bills between the House and the Senate, in my experience, and I was in the State House, as you said, for 8 years before I got elected to the State Senate. Maybe one time that I see legislation go that route. Usually what happens is, even when there are companion bills in both chambers, only one of them will be the one that winds up being what we call the vehicle that actually moves and gets to the governor's desk. So very often you'll see, senators and state reps introduce pretty much the same legislation in both chambers. And then it goes through a process which, potentially could involve amendments and on both on the floor and in committee. Just as way of an example, just today, Caden's Law, Senate Bill 78, which is the bill that I've been working on now for the last 2.5 years. It's a revision of our child custody statute that would enhance the statute to make it more protective of children, particularly in cases of visitation with a potentially abusive parent. And it's named after Caden Mancuso, who was, you may all remember, a 7-year-old living in Lower Makefield, who went to the same elementary school. My kids attended Edgewood Elementary, which is about a mile away from my house. She was the subject of a custody dispute between her mom and her biological father. That case was in Bucks County's courts, and the judge ordered unsupervised weekend visitation with the biological father, notwithstanding the fact that there was plenty of evidence that he had been abusive in the past. Tragically, during one such visitation in early August 2018, he murdered Caden and then killed himself. So when I got to the Senate in early 2019, I started working on legislation with my House colleagues, Tina Davis from Bristol and Perry Warren, who has my old state House seat. And we worked with many of the advocate groups, and we got the bill together. Tina and Perry proposed a bill in the House. I did one in the Senate. They were identical. Last session, we got it out of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate last fall. This time around, when I became chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I went to my Republican counterpart, Lisa Baker, who represents a district in the northeastern corner of Pennsylvania, and asked her whether she would consider sponsoring the bill with me, and she agreed. And she is the first named senator, and I second. And her support of it helped us get it out of committee in January. And I'm happy to say we got it out of the Appropriations Committee today. All bills need to go through Appropriations to determine their fiscal impact on the state budget. And tomorrow it will be brought up for a vote of the full Senate, and I expect that it will pass the Senate, which is very exciting because then it goes to the House, and hopefully we can get it through the House as well. Now, Perry and Tina will introduce the same bill in the House in the hope that if for some reason the Senate vehicle doesn't move, that one would. But I'm hopeful that whatever the case is, at the end of the day, we get this bill to the governor's desk. So that's just an example of the process.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for filling us in on that,
Sure.
An update on your bill. I know that I was out on your website and I was able to sign in support of that bill. So that's another good reason to go to your website to help.
Yeah, thank you very much for doing that. A lot of, well over 2,000 people across the state have done that. So I'm very grateful. So as you said, Judy, that's the legislative process. Obviously, right now, the state has a fiscal year that begins on July 1, ends on June 30. So as you might expect, since the calendar today says June 23, we are in the throes of putting our annual budget together, and we will likely have it wrapped up by Saturday. That is a big part of what we do every year, but dealing with issues like Caden's Law and other bills that come in front of us are also a lot of what we occupy our legislative time on. The other piece of it, as you said, is what happens in the district. And a lot of that is constituent service, but it's also advocating for grant opportunities and other things that can help local governments as well as local businesses and organizations. So for example, 2 years ago, Wendy and I were able to get a pretty significant capital grant for Doylestown to build its new town hall and regional police department. And that is something obviously that's going to have a huge positive impact in the community. Likewise, she and I were able to get grant money for Doylestown Hospital. I've followed that up this year with another grant. There are things like that we do that really can make a difference in the community, helping out the PA Biotech Center, which is technically in Buckingham, although it has a Doylestown mailing address. That is an incubator for biotech innovation and new companies, and that's something else that both she and I have gotten important grants for. And so those types of things can be really helpful and really important to the district. Being an advocate. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you know, you and Wendy were such a great team. I think this is a good time for me just to introduce Wendy a little bit, and then I'll hand it over to, because maybe Wendy was just such a great representative for us. We need her back on our team on the in the 143rd. So if I might, I'll just go briefly there, and then we'll hand some questioning back to Connor. So Wendy Ullman is a Democrat, and she represented the 143rd district in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from 2018 to 2020. Before assuming office, she was an English professor at the Bucks County Community College and at Montgomery County Community College. While in office, Wendy was appointed to the Pennsylvania Statewide Suicide Prevention Task Force and the Higher Education Funding Commission. While in office, Wendy, as you mentioned, she put out some great bills. She introduced HB 1322, House Bill 1322, which would implement a 5-cent beverage deposit fee, which would be returned to the consumer upon the return of the bottle. The intent of the legislation is to increase the rates of recycling in Pennsylvania. Don't know if that's still on the books going forward or not. But Wendy also introduced House Bill 1753, a firearm safety training package. And this legislation would require Pennsylvanians to complete 6 weeks of firearm safety training prior to purchasing his or her first firearm or receiving a concealed carry permit. So thank you for the work that you've done in the House, Wendy, and thank you so much for being here. So I don't know if you want to say anything, or we'll turn it over to Connor.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And Steve, bless your heart. I'm thinking of you and the budget season and all of the stress and craziness that ensues as I have been enjoying a lovely June day. I will say, June is a nice time to be at home and not in Harrisburg. But spending your hard-earned tax dollars is one of the very, very important things that legislators are empowered to do, and we take it very seriously. And like many things, it's usually a lot of back and forth and horse trading and compromising and frustration. But it's a huge part of what we do, because using money to support our values is one of the most important pieces of our responsibility. So why don't we take it from here? Because I think we've covered that topic pretty well.
So I will take it from here, and I will ask you guys some questions. And I'll start, and so I'll introduce myself. I'm Connor O'Hanlon. I'm the chairman of the Doylestown Democrats, and you may have seen us in our prior Vote Local interview series interviews. And usually when I do the questioning, I do kind of the introduction questions, the questions that may seem a little silly to ask sometimes, but people are curious. So I'm going to start with something that could be a very easy and simple question. And that is, what is the difference between a state representative and a state senator, other than running every 2 years and every 4 years? And I'll go to Wendy for that first.
Well, I've never been a senator, so I'm speaking from my experience as a representative, but we do have different powers. There are different numbers of us. That's one of the biggest differences, but we are similar in a great many ways, especially in terms of constituent service. Virtually every service can be dealt with from either office, whether it's the Senate office or whether it's the representative office. And every day was a different puzzle to solve or a constituent issue to deal with. And that is not exactly 200% duplicated from office to office, but of course, when I was in office, Steve and I really complemented each other in our offices. We worked together, and we'd often double team different people who were trying to thread their way through mysteries of, unemployment and a number of different kinds of things. But the Senate has broader scope in what it does. But as far as our approach to passing bills, it's sort of a duplication, but I think Steve can illustrate that much more clearly. I'm not sure I've been 100% clear.
No, I think you have been, Wendy. I have the advantage of having served in both chambers, so it's a little unfair. But I first of all, just like some of the basic differences, as I think that Judy kind of was able to demonstrate graphically with the two maps of the districts. Senate districts are much larger. By population, they're about 4 times the size of state house districts. So on average, state house members represent about 63,000 people. We represent about 255,000. And that number is likely to go up a little bit with the new census figures. Geographically, you know, some of the Senate districts, obviously in Philadelphia, can be relatively small because they're very highly populated areas. But in my case, it takes me well over an hour to drive from one end of the district to the other. And it does have an impact on things, because if you have to get to different events and you have to get to different meetings, it does make it a little bit more challenging. It's one of the reasons why I have 2 offices, one in Doylestown on Lower State Road and one in Newtown. When I was in the State House, it was basically the Yardley Newtown area, and it was very easy to get around. As far as what the 2 chambers do, it's almost identical. The main difference is that in the Senate, we also have, under the state constitution, the ability to offer advice and consent on various gubernatorial appointments. So the governor's cabinet, when there's a vacancy in the courts and the governor has to fill that until the next election, the Senate has to vote on that. So that's one major difference. As a practical matter, the way the chambers function, just being a smaller chamber does facilitate communication among the members, and it does give you a little bit of an opportunity to build relationships across the aisle to the extent that's still possible, and it is, more readily than I think is the case in a House. And something pretty simple that really facilitates that, and this is going to sound kind of maybe banal, but it's really not. We have a dining room off the Senate floor, and if you pay a certain amount every year, you can go in there anytime and get lunch or a snack. And the dining room, you know, that they're just dining tables there, and you sit down with members, and it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans, everyone just kind of breaks bread together. And I have found that that's actually a great way to kind of pull down some of the barriers that exist at times between the two parties. You get to know people on a more human basis. You hear about their families, about, you know, some of the things that they're doing back home, just in casual conversation over lunch. And I think that makes a difference. So again, the smaller environment in the state Senate kind of lends itself to that.
Yeah, that's all super valuable information from both of you. I mean, I would never have known that the lunchroom would be a difference for the 2 chambers. I mean, I'd be pretty jealous if I was in the state house.
Yeah, they talk about it all the time, Connor. They are.
I don't blame them.
When they find out about it, honestly, I had no clue when I was in the state house that the Senate had such a thing. It wasn't until I got elected to the Senate.
Oh man.
So, yeah. So
well, hopefully they don't see this. Then they'll come. So my next question is, we talked a little bit about the process of how a bill becomes a law. Mm-hmm. How do you come forth with a proposal to your committees on a bill you want to propose? And either, I don't know if one of you wants to take that. So that's maybe not the idea, but how do you draft a proposal and how do you bring it to committee?
Right.
You want to take it, Steve?
Sure, I'll take that one. So, you know, what happens is, let's use Cadence Law as an example. So there was a tragedy that occurred in my district. It gave rise to discussions with various advocates about what we could do to change the law. That in turn then started the drafting process. Once you have drafted a bill, and there's a service here in the legislature that helps us draft legislation that finds the right part of the existing state code in which a bill should be amended into. You then send out a memo to your colleagues on both sides of the aisle, describing what the bill is going to be and asking them to join you as a named sponsor on the bill. Now, I just want to draw a distinction really quickly. There's a difference between prime sponsors. Those are the people who actually are the ones responsible for the bill, who are responsible for helping to write it. And the co-sponsors, and these are the people who, as a result of the memo I just described, to say, okay, I want to put my name on that bill too, because I think it's a good idea. So for example, with Caden's Law, Senator Baker and I are the co-prime sponsors. And then we have a number of Democrats and Republicans who have put their names on the bill because they support it. Once that happens and the bill is ready to be introduced, and you can decide whenever you want to introduce the bill, once you think you have enough folks on the bill. For example, one of my other pieces of legislation is Senate Bill 570, which is the current version of the LGBTQ civil rights bill. I waited until I got every Democrat on that bill, and I tried to get a Republican. I couldn't, unfortunately. And then we dropped the bill. We introduced it. When that happens, it goes to the president. In our case, the president's office. In the House, it goes to the speaker, and then their office decides what committee it goes to. Depending on the subject matter of the bill, it will go to the standing committee that deals with that subject matter. So in my case, with Caden's Law, it went to the Judiciary Committee. And likewise with the LGBTQ rights bill. Then it's up to the majority chair of the committee as to whether it's ever going to be brought up to be considered. And that's why having the majority makes such a difference, because the majority controls what legislation gets heard and what doesn't. And so, again, I was fortunate in being able to work with Senator Baker on Caden's Law. She was committed to bringing the bill up for a vote, and she did that and has been the force behind getting it brought to the floor for a vote. So I hope does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Can I just jump in here, Connor?
Yeah.
One thing that's more of a backstory, maybe. To me, it was very instructive to see what the inspiration, I guess you would say, it would be. Because, of course, I came new to the whole system. It's like, well, where does the idea come from? And, of course, Caden's Law is what I had always envisioned it to be. Something happens to people that you represent, and then you do something to help them. I had a similar situation where a parent came to me where a teacher had been taking photos, upskirt photos, and then published them on the internet. It was a long story, but the upshot was they learned to their horror that the punishment for this crime was about equivalent to shoplifting, and we wanted to change the law. So I went through the process, talked to the legal team, got the phrasing, learned where to put it, got another Republican to co-sponsor with me. And that was the inspiration of someone came to my office and said, oh my God, you've got to help us. That's what I had always envisioned it as being, but there were other ways to get laws moved forward. Another law that the recycling bill, there was a package of environmental bills that a very effective environmental group wanted to see introduced, and they offered them to some of us who were interested. And I said, oh, I would definitely want to take the recycling bill, because I had lived in both Maine and New York where they've been recycling or paying a deposit on beverages I don't know, since the 70s in New York State. And so I was very familiar with it. So that was sort of offered. And then, so I learned about what they wanted and then went with the legal team and wrote the legislation. And then another incident, which I had just thought about it years ago, and it was like, yes, we got to do this. And that was the gun safety training bill, which I thought was perfect sense. My family are hunters, and I always thought it was ironic that you have to take a hunter safety course before you can get a hunting license, but all you have to do is pull out your credit card to buy a gun. And so, you know, those are the kinds of backstories and inspirations that as legislators, people are able to use, put together, and then try to put forth bills that they think make good sense and that can do, you know, make effective change. So anybody out there has an idea, call Steve.
Yeah.
Call him.
Yeah. So Wendy, your bill did pass that you had proposed for the upskirting, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, it's a good thing.
Yes. Congratulations.
I mean,
on that.
I didn't pass it. They wouldn't put it in committee. They basically kept it out of committee because it's part of jockeying for position, not giving me any credits, and keep basically shutting me out. But in December, after I had lost the election, it was introduced by my successor. And
so that bill is through the House again, and Bob Mensch and I have the same bill in the Senate as I did last year. Yep. So, and it's passed out of the Senate. So, yep. So that's an example again, Judy. That those are two bills, same bill basically. They're crossing the chambers, and the question will be which chamber they decide they're going to move the legislation. So, well,
it's a good thing, and I'm very happy.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, Connor, there is a question in the chat from Lisa McCauley. So Lisa asked, I've heard that we have one of the largest state legislatures in the country. Can you explain why?
No, I have no idea. I have no idea why we have the second largest in the country. It's a bit bloated, in my opinion.
Well, it's interesting because I know that we're losing a House seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. So will that also, I think this is in the same line of questioning, will that also be something that would the census lose us a seat also in the State House?
No. So you know, the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives is 435 members. That does not change after each census. What happens is there needs to be first reapportionment among the states based on population changes, so that number is redivided based on where the states are by way of population. At the state level, in the same way, the number of seats in both chambers does not change. What happens is, based on population changes as evidenced by the census, the reapportionment commission then needs to decide whether seats need to move around the state. So, for example, my old state house seat, State House District 31, was actually a seat that was in Allegheny County years ago. And then after the 1990 census, what happened was, because Allegheny County and Western PA generally was and still is losing population, and the Southeast, and in particular Bucks County at that time, was growing, Bucks County deserved another seat, and Allegheny County was in line to lose one. So they simply moved that district to Bucks County. And my predecessor, Dave Stile, got elected in '92 in the first election where that seat was now in Bucks County. So that happens, but the numbers don't actually change. Yes, this Pennsylvania legislature is very large. It's not the biggest. I think New Hampshire has that dubious distinction. I would say, you know, I have supported in the past and voted in favor of bills that would reduce the state house from 203 to 153, That would roughly change the populations of the districts from about 63,000 to about 85,000. You could probably cut it in half and it would be fine. I think the Senate, 50 members is probably about right. 255, 260,000, residents per district. The problem I found in the House is it's so big that it does make it a little harder to build those relationships, and it becomes a little bit more unruly at times, to be honest. I found that the House spends a lot more time on the floor, not necessarily accomplishing anything than the Senate does. And it's because you have so many members and they all want to speak, and the debate can drown on forever and it doesn't necessarily accomplish a lot. But, I think reducing the size of the House would make sense. But again, I think it's unlikely to happen, unfortunately, because the people who would have to approve that are people who, would potentially lose their seats. So.
Right.
All right, so I'll go back to one of my next questions, and it kind of builds on my first question about bringing a bill to committee, and I'll start with you, Wendy. While you were serving, what was the most important committee, or in your view at least, that you served on, and then we'll go to Steve after, and why?
Well, important is not necessarily, they're all important, but in terms of dealing with weighty issues and really impactful issues, it was absolutely state government, hands down, from the first day when they refused to talk about doing anything about changing the House rules. Although they did have a hilarious discussion about the state amphibian. I thought that was going to be fun. That was the last time we had fun. But once COVID hit, there was bill after bill after bill trying to usurp and countermand the governor's ability to maintain his governor's prerogative to lock down and to make sure that there was a single source of control for how to handle all the requirements of dealing with the COVID crisis. And we passed every single we went through every single one of those bills, debated it, discussed it, got red in the face sometimes. And of course, every single one was passed with a Republican majority because of the nature of the committees. In the House of Representatives, every committee has 25 members, 15 are Republicans and 10 are Democrats. So you know what the outcome is going to be, but state government handled all of those awful, awful bills that came through pertaining to elections as well. It was such a fight to get any changes in the election law to deal with sensible ways to deal with write-in ballots or mail-in ballots and all those kinds of things. That was before COVID. That was an ongoing struggle where we would put together plans and then suddenly see something that we'd never seen before. We'd get something about 42 minutes before we had to vote on it. We'd never seen it, and it's nothing that we had discussed. So state government had really weighty and impactful issues, but also health. Health had numerous weighty bills that one after another restricted women's access to reproductive rights, restricted women's access to abortion, and they were all passed, every single one of them. And Governor Wolf vetoed every single one of them. So it was a pretty intense freshman experience for me.
Steve, what about you in the Senate? What's the I guess I don't know of another phraseology for it, but the most important committee that you've been serving on?
Yeah, so thanks. I would say, Connor, that it's I would say maybe the most impactful as opposed to important, because they're all, as Wendy said, they're all important. But I serve on I did in the House as well, the Appropriations Committee, and I also, as I said before, serve on the Judiciary Committee. And I think those are two of the most impactful committees in the legislature. The Appropriations Committee meets every week, sometimes a couple of times during the week. Now in budget time, it meets every day. And the Judiciary Committee meets just about every week. And there are a lot of bills that deal with criminal justice reform, that deal with issues like child custody or civil rights that are in that committee. So they're pretty impactful. And I've found too, now with the report that just came out yesterday on the second phase of juvenile justice reform in Pennsylvania, that a lot of there will be bills that will have bipartisan support that are good pieces of legislation that will move through that committee. The Appropriations Committee considers every bill that comes through the legislature because it has to consider them for fiscal impact. And obviously every year it has to deal with the budget. And in the late winter, early spring, every year, we have our appropriations hearings. Essentially what happens is the governor makes his budget address in February, outlines his proposal for what the budget should be in the coming fiscal year. And then the committee meets and it has hearings with every executive department, as well as some of the independent agencies like the Attorney General's office. And those hearings, usually each one of them lasts a couple of hours, and they happen over 3 weeks. And it's a great way to learn how the state government works, and to know the budget inside and out and really know where the money's going and what it's being used for. So that process then continues on through the springtime until you get to this time of year when it culminates in the budget and all of the related bills getting passed in both chambers. So that's exactly what we're doing right now. And that's why we're here, every day this week and probably Saturday as well until we get the budget done.
It's not fun working on Saturdays. I know that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this story. My first year in Harrisburg was in 2009. I was a freshman in the State House, and it was one of Ed Rendell's last budgets. And there was an impasse, and we were here every day in July, Saturdays and Sundays included. And we were here into the beginning of August. We took a break in August, although we had to come back one day, which happened to be right in the middle of my vacation in Bethany Beach. And I drove the 4.5 hours back here for that. And then we got the budget done in October. Governor Wolf's first budget was 2015, and I was in my, I guess, fourth term that year. And that impasse lasted all the way until December. So while we were not here all summer long that year, it was still a very difficult budget process. This year, we have a huge surplus in revenue because of the improving economy. And we have $7.3 billion in money from the American Rescue Plan. Unfortunately, it looks as if our Republican colleagues do not want to spend much of that money to do things that we need to do, like put more money into education, because we're currently about 45th in the country in terms of how much we spend on public ed. Rebuild our schools, particularly the ones that have issues with asbestos and lead and where they're really dilapidated. Investing in infrastructure, which is something that we really need to do. Those are all things that we should be doing, but we won't be doing. Instead, most of that money is going to go unspent on the argument that we need to maintain a surplus so that when there's a downturn, we don't have deficits. I understand that, and I don't think anyone's arguing that it all needs to be spent, but I do think that there are things we should be doing that we have put off for far too long in this state that not only will help people right away, but also will further benefit the economy. And but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I think there will be some more money that goes into basic education, and that will be good, but probably not as much as we have the ability to do at this point.
So this is a good time kind of jumping in here because we had a writing question from a very important community member, Jeff. He had this question: how can Democrats, so to your whole point here about the spending the money, how can Democrats break the stranglehold that the Republicans have on the legislature?
Elect more Democrats.
Yeah, and here's how we can do that. First of all, there needs to be fair maps, right? The maps, and I don't want to digress too much on this, but the process that we use to draw our district maps is that we have a 5-member commission. I think, Judy, you were talking about this at the beginning. This time around, it is 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. 10 years ago, it was 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and they just gerrymandered the districts. So when Wendy ran for re-election last year, in a more challenging year because of the Trump wave that materialized on election day, and only having been in for 2 years, which is not enough time to really cement yourself in the district, she lost re-election. Because that district was drawn to elect Republicans, okay? If we have fair maps where the maps are more compact and contiguous and represent similar communities, I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to have fair campaigns and win. So that fair maps are point number 1. Point number 2 is making sure that Democrats don't go into hibernation in 2022. Just because we got Joe Biden elected, and I'm not minimizing that, our democracy depended on that and still does depend on it, doesn't mean that we can all now just, go on our merry way and wait until the next presidential election in 2024. That Democrats did that in 2010 to disastrous results. And I can tell you from personal experience, because that was my first re-election year to the state house. And at that time, my district was a swing district. It was much more competitive than it is now. It had half of Upper Makefield in it. And I won, but I won in a very close contest. It was a 162 vote margin. And I was one of the only Democrats freshman Democrats in the suburbs of Philadelphia who held on to his seat. We can't have that happen again next year, particularly if we have fair maps. We have to make sure as Democrats, as committee members, as people who are active, that every Democrat gets out to vote. There can't be any drop off next year from what we had last year. And I think mail-in balloting is going to help us in that regard. But we have to make sure that people understand issues like, look, just as an example, if God forbid the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, that issue comes back to the states. And our abortion law here in Pennsylvania will then be at risk of being overturned. So we have to make sure that we have Democrats in the legislature and we have a Democratic governor, that doesn't happen. Those things, education, many of the environmental laws that govern our state, those are things, we need Democratic majorities in place so that we can actually do good things. And I have to tell you, I'm tired of being in the minority. I'm tired of not being able to help set an agenda that actually puts the state on the right track. We are, every year, the Independent Fiscal Office gives us a report at the beginning of the budget process. And every year it says the same thing about our demographics in Pennsylvania. We are getting older and we are becoming less diverse. And as that happens, the economy becomes less dynamic, and coincidentally, it becomes a more conservative Republican state, which is why the election last year was as close as it was. It should never have been that close with Biden and Trump. So we have our work cut out for us, and we as Democrats locally have to make sure we're continuing to get that message out to folks that we need to get them out to the polls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Connor, anything else from you? Okay.
Nope.
So Wendy and Steve, thank you so much. We're going to just wrap this up and let people know how they can get more involved locally, just to the points that Steve and Wendy just made. We need you to be involved locally, and here's some things that you can do. As Wendy had said in an email to me, find your passion, whether it's environmental, gun safety, animal rights, whatever it might be. There's a committee that you can find on your township level or your county level or your borough level. Get involved, share your skills. Attend your local Democrats meeting. The Doylestown Democrats do meet the first Monday of every month, except for 4th of July weekend coming up. Otherwise, if you're not in Doylestown, go to the Bucks County Democratic Committee website and look for the calendar of events. Volunteer for local candidates. In November, we have an election on November 2nd, and we have row officers running. We have school board seats running. Those people need your helps, and judges are also running. These local positions are very important to all of us. You can volunteer with an activist group, whether it's Rise Up Doylestown, Bucks Voices, or the Women's Forum. And then also, please get out and vote. If you have a mail-in ballot, you have to mail it before November 2nd. Now, in the primaries last year, you could have mailed it prior to, as long as it was postmarked by the primary day. This year, in the primaries, it had to be received by May 2nd. So just make sure that your mail-in ballot, if you're doing that, is there in plenty of times, or use, hopefully, the expanded drop boxes, ballot drop boxes. But do get out and vote on November 2nd. So a special thanks again to Senator Santarsiero and former State Representative Wendy Ullman. Thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate the time that you gave us in your busy schedule. Steve, calling in from your car. It was very, very nicely done. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate everything you're doing. I mean, it's really, Doylestown Democrats are a terrific organization. Connor, you've done a great job as chair. Judy, I really appreciate,
Okay, I think Steve got muted there, but we'll take that. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, and yes, I'd like to thank the Doylestown Dems, to all of us who have put this all together. And in particular, our production team, Jeff Cogswell, Carl Herring, Karen Forbes, Bonnie Chang, who's helped us in the past, and Kevin Green, and especially Connor O'Hanlon jumping back in on this last session. And thanks you for all of you who have donated to the interview series. And lastly, this is our final interview, but this is just the beginning. Thanks for everyone for joining us this evening and in past interviews. It has been a wonderful journey to learn more about the duties of our local officials and to meet the people that are doing those special jobs for us. Our hope is that you do get local and stay involved locally. It starts here. It starts in your borough, in your school boards, and in your counties. So we hope to see you at the next Doylestown Democrat meeting, or whichever meeting from the municipality that you're with. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye.